Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And have you ever punched a wall, like in anger, like just punched right through some drywall like Andy Bernard did in that episode of The Office? I tried it once. When I was a kid, that's what you're supposed to do. That's how you let people know that you were mad. If you were a dude in movies, TV shows, you just be like, and you just punch right through a wall, clean through every time. You never hit a stud or anything. Like, you just kind of know where those are as a man. And you just punch right through it. And there's never any consequence for that ever. I mean, maybe your wife, played by Meredith Baxter Birney, goes on the run and you have to chase her down later. I don't know exactly how it would always play out, but it was just a thing that you'd see. And I remember feeling really confident as a kid that, like, if you are really mad, not sort of mad, but like crazy mad, you should punch drywall. So one time I got real mad. And I was like, I need other people to know how theatrically angry I am. And so I balled up my fist, and I did hit a stud, and it did not break the drywall. It dented it lightly, and then I tried to pass it off as though I were joking, but I wasn't. I actually was mad, and then my parents found out, and they made me learn how to patch drywall, and I had to fix the place where I dented the drywall, but didn't actually even punch through it because the stud was very sturdy behind it. Likewise, in Bible times, there's a gesture for making it really clear that if you were religious and a religious leader, that you were really mad. Not like 8 out of 10 mad, not like 8.5 out of 10 mad, but like the maddest you could be about anything that anyone could ever say, and it is a touch theatrical. It was to just rip your clothes, the ones you were wearing right there. You just rip them like Hulk Hogan. You just shred them right off you, and you yell in agony about the thing that got said. And in Matthew 26, we got Jesus saying something that made people so mad, not 8 mad, not 8.5 mad, 10 mad, that they had to rip their clothes to make the point. And that's what happens here. So the high priest said to Jesus, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Yes, it is as you say, Jesus replied. But I say to all of you, in the future you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, he has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you've heard the blasphemy. What do you think? He is worthy of death, they answered. So that was it. Now we know the line. Now we know the thing that you can't say. What you can't say is, yes, I am indeed the Christ, the Messiah. And what you can't say is that further, that is going to be testable. And you are going to see proof. You people right here questioning, you're going to see proof of that. Because if you say that to the high priest Caiaphas, he grabs his real expensive robes and just rips them right there. Now look, okay, I've tried stuff like this before, like making pro wrestling videos with my kid friends when we were little and stuff. And to do that, like, you definitely got to rip some clothes, right? So you try it, and it's not as easy as it looks. If you just go yanking on that, like, there's a lot of seams, and especially collars are nearly invincible. It's just not going to happen. It's like, have you ever tried to rip a phone book in half? It's just little sheets of paper, but when you put them all together, they're incredibly powerful. You can't just rip a phone book in half unless you remember the Power Team. I mean, so all bets are off with that, but it's just, that's not normal. So you can't just rip your clothes. You kind of got to start it. You got to cut a little V or something so you can be like, I'm going to rip this one right here, but it's already kind of started. You got to give it a little episiotomy. And that is exactly what I think must have happened here. I can't prove it, but I don't think the high priest Caiaphas was strong enough to just rip his robes. I think he planned on ripping his robes, and I think he'd already nicked the neckline of that so that he could rip them just the right way, and it would be terribly, terribly dramatic. And maybe it had the dramatic effect that was intended. I'm in such agony at even hearing these words. I'm going to have to destroy some stuff. Give me something to break. Now, this behavior is something that Josephus documents as being part of the playbook of this same religious leadership, the same religious administration around this time. Pontius Pilate, who we're going to meet here in just a minute, is the governor at this point. Pontius Pilate came into a very testy situation in his governorship because Well, I mean, these religious leaders, some of them are playing nice, some of them are playing not nice, but they all want the same thing: retain their power, more of it, and maybe Rome not there and in their business so much, if possible, because they imagine that in the absence of more Rome, there would be more of them. And so Pilate makes a series of missteps that we've talked about before. He hangs up some shields that have the image of the emperor on them near the temple complex in Jerusalem. Well, the emperor holds himself out as being a god. That's idolatry. And so there's outrage over that from this same administration, these same religious leaders. They go to the same playbook. You got another issue where Pilate went to complete an aqueduct and used some of the money from the local treasury, just not reading the room, not understanding what the local treasury meant or how that would be received. And then you got another incident with some banners where the banners also had something that resembled the emperor on it and would have been thought of as idolatry. And in response to one or maybe a cumulative effect of all of these gaffes on the part of Pontius Pilate, a whole bunch of these people who would have been in this room, went all the way up to the courtyard in Caesarea Maritima, maybe 40 miles? I don't know, I'm not remembering. Call it 40 miles north and west of Jerusalem on the coast. They hoofed it all the way up there, and they set up shop in this big area outside of the gubernatorial palace, a place where I've gone and stood, and they put themselves on their knees. And they took out knives and threatened to slash their own throats. They tore their clothes, and they made it clear that the idolatry that was happening because of those banners and those shields, maybe even in messing with treasury that might have had things in there connected with the history of the Jewish people and with God, that was too much. And while maybe not every culture would have this custom, that was the custom here. That's something that these religious leaders do to very theatrically make their point that you've gone too far. And in fairness, they sort of have a point on those other ones, right? You got the 10 Commandments. You're not supposed to do idolatry. I mean, it's a little bit theocratic and over the top for them to go and threatened to do ritual mass suicide, something that a group of Jewish people did eventually do in response to mounting Roman pressure and even impending routing by Roman soldiers. We find out that this sort of thing isn't entirely just a threat later on, but this sort of gesture of self-harm or rending one's garments while the way I just phrase it points to some foundation for this in the Old Testament. It's still really clear from extra-biblical sources that the Old Testament prophetic notion of rend your heart, not your garments, and the external show is not what God wants here. What God wants is a contrite and broken heart, this spirit of humility in regard to the things that have gone wrong or even that you have got wrong. Instead, this more external gesture was one that was just part of the deal at this point. And so this account from Matthew entirely squares with what we see outside the Bible. It's kind of like a couple of the really hard swears. Like, you don't want to use them too lightly, right? It's just, it's lazy. And then they lose all their punch. You want to keep those in reserve in case something really crazy happens. And maybe you decide then you're going to break out one of those real hard swears. Something I do not recommend, young people. I'm against that. I'm just talking about how some people use the swears. Do with that whatever you need. Parent hard. Sorry to everyone. So we got this dramatic external display of what Jesus said being just insufferably too much. But we also still have the goings on of a trial here, as immediately the high priest follows us up saying, why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now we've heard the blasphemy. He's saying he said it about himself. He's condemned by his own testimony. He didn't take the fifth. He incriminated himself by his own claims. Now, obviously, their internal assumption is that such claims deserve death. And that since now they've got Jesus caught in his own words, he finally said too much. He finally knotted up his own noose. Now the whole room is content to answer, he is worthy of death. Now here's the problem. Theoretically, these guys aren't allowed to carry out death sentences anymore. Maybe they were allowed to kind of participate in that before, back during the Hasmonean dynasty in the era of the Maccabean kings, but that isn't the case now. Rome alone swings the sword. They have the monopoly on violence. They are the government. And so the religious leaders, they're going to have to turn around and take this to Pilate and sell him on the idea that what Jesus claimed is somehow an existential threat to Rome so that Rome can then do the dirty work. But before we round out this trial, see what's going on with Peter, find out whether or not Pilate is up for it. Hint, he is. Before that, I just want to consider for a minute whether the religious leaders even considered for a minute that Jesus might actually be the Messiah. Is there anybody in this room who's like, well, I mean, he did do a lot of the things that he was supposed to do. And I mean, that stuff that he said about Psalm 110, that was actually pretty good. That was a solid point that we hadn't really thought of or acknowledged, and feel like we're just kind of letting that roll by. And some of his critiques were, I mean, they were all right. I mean, come on, guys. I mean, sometimes we can be a little much, right? And I mean, it's possible that we could reread many of those texts about the Messiah in light of a spiritual deliverer who would resolve the problem of sin for all mankind and not just a militaristic deliverer for us. Like, maybe anybody? Was anybody thinking that? I don't know, but I want to do a little bit of poking around and review and dig deeper into what maybe they were thinking before we move forward next. I've gotten a lot of great feedback on the Rooktown album, The Clamor and the Crash that Jeff did. I think it is so stinking good. I'm so grateful to everybody who's taken the time to listen and say nice things. Thank you. Somebody let me know, like, oh, I just streamed it. I wanted to make sure that we helped to get off to a good start. You are awesome. Thank you for streaming that. That rules. If you haven't given it a try yet, I'd be grateful if you would. The album is called The Clamor and the Crash. The band name is Rooktown. You can search it on Spotify. I don't get anything for this. I just think it's really, really cool, and I want Jeff to succeed because I think he made awesome art, and I think you're going to like it too. Thanks for hanging out with me. Remember never to punch drywall in between the studs or on the stud or at all, because it's just mean and menacing and stupid, and those 80s movies were wrong. It's a terrible way to show that you're angry. Don't do that. Also, maybe don't rip your clothes. Clothes are expensive and hard to replace. And kids, especially you outgrow them so fast. We got to get all the value out of them we can as quickly as we're able to. No ripping clothes. Seriously, come on. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.